Obviously, I mean, as someone who's been involved in this case from the get-go and has driven a lot of the investigation, the fact that George Luca is coming back to South Africa is pretty significant. Why do you think that is?
Well, remember George Luca, whatever you want to call him, has been with Krejcir since the day he arrived in the country, almost. I think maybe a day or two later. So George Luca knows a lot more about Krejcir and Krejcir's operations than anybody else in South Africa.
And in terms of the murder itself, I mean, he's been described as the trigger man. He's been described as the person who killed Lolly Jackson, suspected. Is that, according to what you know of the situation, is that a fair description of him?
No, I don't believe he shot Lolly Jackson. I have my own theory about what happened that night, and that theory does not include George Luca pulling the trigger. I believe he was present, and I believe others were present. I know for a fact that Cyril Beaker was there, and so was General Mabasa. So I think what we'd like now is to hear firsthand from the horse's mouth as to exactly what did transpire that night.
You're saying that Radovan and George, they were basically together from the moment that Krejcir arrived in the country. What was the basis of their friendship? How did they become friends?
Well, they shared a cell together in prison. They were at Modderby, and Krejcir was awaiting an extradition hearing. And nobody knew that George Smith was actually George Luca, but George Luca at that time was masquerading as George Smith, and he had an ID book. I've got a copy of the ID book. And he was allegedly a South African. But I mean, the minute he opens his mouth, he's not a South African. And the two of them were languishing together at Modderby. And I think George Luca said, I'm going to introduce you to some lawyers that will be able to help you go to where you want to be. And I'm not naming the lawyers, but I know who they were. And as a result of some shady conduct on the part of those lawyers, Krejcir was released from prison instead of being sent back to the Czech Republic, which is what should have happened. And South Africa has had to put up with his nonsense for the last 6-7 years.
It's become very apparent Krejcir's alleged criminal activity. Do you believe that Luca returning to the country may even shed further light on that kind of an alleged involvement?
Look, I've been busy with this now for over 4 years. The list of police officers I have that need to go to prison because of their links with Radovan Krejcir exceeds 20. And I think only 4 or 5 have been arrested up to now. So I'm expecting to see a lot more police officers arrested. And I'm fairly certain that George Luca will perhaps shed a bit more light on some of those relationships. I mean, just by way of example, you've got Joey Mabasa. Now, he was a general in the police. He was the head of crime intelligence for Gauteng. Now, when the head of crime intelligence is involved with the criminal underworld, the future for the country isn't looking too good. So I fingered Joey Mabasa. He tricked me into giving him a copy of my dossier on Radovan Krejcir in the early days. And it was only a week after that, when I gave him that dossier, that I realized he shared it with Radovan Krejcir. And I realized, that we had some big problems. It took me another, I think, 6 months. In fact, it was only after the murder of Lolly Jackson that I was able to start bringing a spotlight onto Joey Mabasa. And lo and behold, instead of being arrested, which he should have been, he was let go. He was given a 3 million rand golden handshake. I understand that was authorized by General Mdluli, when in fact he should have been arrested. Now, I have been publicly calling for his arrest for a very long time, and I'm again repeating that. This man must be arrested. He needs to go behind bars. And I'm also calling for the arrest of the station commander at Bedfordview Police Station. That police station is rotten to the core. And in my opinion, a fish rots from the head. And I have personal knowledge. The station commander at Bedfordview Police Station, in full uniform, sitting in a restaurant across from Bedfordview Police Station, with Radovan Krejcir at his side, interrogated a friend of mine. And Krejcir leaned across the table and tapped my friend on the forehead like this 3 times and told him, "I can put 3 bullets in your head." And then insisted on him telling Krejcir what his relationship with me was and why he'd phoned me so many times on a certain day. And my friend said, "Well, how do you know I phoned O'Sullivan so many times on that day?" Krejcir, in front of a colonel in the police, says, "Listen, I've got his phone records. I've got friends in the police. I can get anything I want." Now, that colonel is still in charge at Bedford View Police Station. He should be in prison. So I think maybe with George Luca coming, home, if that's the right expression, we're going to see a stepping up of these investigations.
With Radovan Krejcir behind bars, and I mean, do you think that the kind of alleged influence that he had over the police may have mitigated against Louca being willing to come back earlier? I mean, what has been the impact of Radovan actually being in prison now?
I've been building up a case against Krejcir and his associates now for, I think, 4.5 years. And some of the statements, the sworn statements I've taken, they have not been able to see the light of day because the people that have given those sworn statements have been very scared for their lives. People are becoming a little bit more brazen now. They're becoming more bullish about their approach and whether or not they would give evidence and so on and so forth. And some of these witnesses are now saying, well, this is great, the whole empire is tumbling. I've got no doubt at all. I mean, I went to Cyprus to track George Luca down, and it was a mission and a half. I battled, and unfortunately I didn't manage to track him down. Eventually, by the time I found out where he was, I was at the airport waiting for my plane to fly out. So I put others on to him. Now, he made it clear all along that he would be happy to come back here and give evidence if he can be protected. And obviously we're hoping now that he is being protected. I don't expect to see George Luca being charged with any very serious offences, but he'll probably have to stay in jail for a while, if not for his own safety. But I doubt if he'll be sharing a cell with Radovan Krejcir again.
Do you think that from what you're seeing, the tide has turned in terms of the alleged influence that Krejcir had been able to have over the police services? We've seen members getting arrested. We've seen strong rhetoric from the National Commissioner's Office. Do you have faith that somehow the tide has turned in terms of that alleged influence that he's been exerting?
I've always had faith in the South African criminal justice system. I've always known that it has got its, defects as well, and that's why I exercise caution in the work that I do. I think the last time I knowingly or unwittingly provided information to a dirty cop was in 2010, when I gave Mabasa a copy of my dossier on Krejcir. But to be on the safe side, I didn't give him everything anyway. So I always exercise caution when I'm dealing with the police. But I have to say I've always had faith in the criminal justice system, and I believe, dirty cops eventually get caught. And that's what we're going to see happening here. We're going to see the dirty cops getting caught, and it should send out a very clear signal to their counterparts, their honest cops in the police service, that dishonesty doesn't pay, crime doesn't pay, and sooner or later you will find yourself being a part of that criminal justice system, or in the case of some of Krejcir's associates, you wind up dead.
One of the difficulties that one would imagine the state may have had with George Smith or George Luca is that he has had quite a profound drug problem. He has been a crack addict. What is the status of that situation as far as you know?
I've always known that George Luca had a drug problem. In fact, he's probably a criminal because of his drug problem, because he was stealing or buying stolen property to feed his drug problem. And now you have the situation where he even became a liability to Krejcir. I mean, Krejcir sent a couple of people over to the Czech Republic to kill 3 people in the Czech Republic. And the 2 people he sent, one is a person whose details I have but I'm not going to mention, and the other is a chap by the name of George Luca. So he sent the 2 of them over there. Now, they were to meet up with a Bulgarian guy when they were there, and the Bulgarian guy was the hitman. And the Krejcir's mother was going to supply the weapon, a Scorpion submachine gun. And George Luca, I don't know why Krejcir sent him along, probably to keep an eye on the other guy that he sent along, because it was the first job, if you want to call it that the other guy had done for him. And there was some guy supposed to arrive at the hotel to give them pocket money for the journey, you know, while they were there, to pay for all the things they had while they were there. And the guy arrived late. And when he arrived, the other person and the Bulgarian were not there, but George Luca was. And the guy handed him a bag with all the money in. And George Luca took the money and vanished. And he pitched up, you know, that was sort of in the morning. He only pitched up the following evening, high as a kite, and all the money was gone. And they had to call off the mission. They went back later to try and do it. But I mean, when they went back the second time, the Bulgarian guy, with a fair display of profanities, said he didn't want that crackhead to be brought on the mission. And if he came, you know, he wasn't going to be involved. So, yeah, George Luca was a bit of a liability on that. In fact, you know, I'm still in the process of trying to persuade the Hawks to arrest Radovan Krejcir's mother as a conspiracy on that case. And I've got sworn statements already, so maybe George Luca is going to fill in the gaps there, and maybe we can, you know, maybe Krejcir's mother can share a cell with him.
Is George Luca lucid, though, according to what you know?
Yes, I've spoken to his attorneys. In fact, I've had several discussions with his attorneys in Cyprus over the last year or so, and I'm quite comfortable that George Luca will be able to tell a fairly detailed story, and then I think we'll see the sparks flying.
I've had conversations with both Radovan and George Luca in which they mutually, and this was a few, you know, over a period of time and not that recently, in which they both described each other as friends. And Luca said that he would speak to me because Radovan said it was okay, and Radovan said that, you know, he was trying to persuade George to come and face the wrath of the law and explain things. But it seems now that relationship may have changed. Are they still friends? What's the relationship now? What do you understand by it?
Well, they're not friends, and the reason they're not friends is because Krejcir agreed to pay a sum of money to Luca on a monthly basis, pretty much ad infinitum, if he went to Cyprus and buried himself down and kept his mouth shut. And Krejcir stopped paying. Now, you know, I think when he stopped paying, he must have realized that Luca would become a liability. I received information, you know, Luca was not, although he arrived, you know, now, he was due to arrive last year. And to the extent that police officers were sent from South Africa to Cyprus and were waiting in Nicosia for George Luca to be handed over to them. And at the last moment, his lawyer entered an appeal. Otherwise, you know, we would have seen him back here last year. Now, he made it very clear, his lawyers made it very clear as well, one's forking out their fees, not Radovan Krejcir. So I think Radovan Krejcir suddenly developed short arms and deep pockets. And I think that affected the relationship with George Luca. The other thing is, George Luca started to realize that keeping quiet anymore wasn't going to help his cause, because you've got a general in the police who went on the record as having said that he got a phone call from George Luca saying, I've just shot, although he says George Smith, that I've just shot Lolly Jackson. Now, I know for a fact that General Mabasa was lying when he made that statement, and he knows exactly what happened. So you've got George Luca sitting there thinking, wow, I've got a general in the police fitting me up for this crime. I've got Krejcir fitting me up for this crime. it's probably better if I just come clean. And I think that's what he's, now going to do.
He has said in previous things that there were 2 weapons used and that multiple people shot Lolly Jackson. According to what you know, is that correct? Is that what he's said?
I'm a forensic specialist. I work with facts. There certainly appears to be more people at the crime scene than we've been led to believe. At this stage, I've got a copy of the forensic report in the pathologist report. At this stage, it would appear that there were certainly a lot of shots fired. I think it was 5 or 6 that hit him. If George Luca is saying there were 2 people shooting, I think we should listen to what he's got to say. In my opinion, the people that know what happened that night are Lolly Jackson, Cyril Beaker, George Luca, and Joey Mabasa. And without the use of a Ouija board, we're not going to get an answer from Lolly Jackson or Cyril Beaker. It's extremely unlikely that Joey Mabasa is going to tell us what happened. So I think we're all waiting with bated breath to see what George Luca is going to say.
Finally, Paul, given his obvious value as a witness, and given that he stated that he was there, given that he knows these things, what are the likelihoods that he's actually going to, if he ends up testifying, actually going to make it to the witness box? Because surely there's a huge target on his back now.
I think probably what has to happen is he has to be looked after. More severe steps need to be taken against Krejcir. He was found again last week with a cell phone on him. And until the correctional services start carrying out their mandate correctly and having Krejcir being monitored 24 hours a day, 7 days a week to make sure he's not arranging for further hits, every person that visits Krejcir in prison must have their discussions with him tape recorded. That's the kind of lockdown they've got to get into. And if they're not prepared to get into that lockdown, then they're playing in the wrong league. We have to have a situation where even the conversations with his lawyers in prison have to be tape recorded for security reasons, because I don't trust Krejcir's lawyers at all.
But your feeling, do you think Luca will make it?
My gut feeling is he'll make it, and the reason I think he'll make it is because Krejcir's run out of people to deal with. At the end of the day, I think Krejcir's luck is now finished. It's over. I don't think that man will ever breathe fresh air again, as long as he lives, because when he's finished with the criminal justice system here, there's a cell waiting for him in the Czech Republic. And I hear that they've agreed that when he's finished his sentence there, he can be sent to the Seychelles and serve his sentence there as well.
So where does Michaelides fit in?
Well, George Michaelides, apart from anything else, is, comes from a Greek Cypriot family. So him and George Smith / George Luca were buddies anyway. And George Michaelides was involved in some of the money laundering for George Luca and in moving money out of the country for himself. Now, George Michaelides, as you're probably aware, there's a warrant for his arrest. He stole millions and millions from his trust account. But George Michaelides had a problem of his own, and that was he had somebody close to him that had compromised him, and that was this guy, Kevin Tradesman. Now, Kevin Tradesman had been interfering with some of the state witnesses in the Celebi matter. And when I say interfering with them, like threatening them, And he'd even made implied threats against me. He told some of the state witnesses in this Celebi matter that he was going to have me killed and blah, 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 and blah, 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 So I tackled Kevin Tradesman head on. And he admitted to me that he was nothing but a petty thief, and not a very good one at that. A person of very low ethics. And he also admitted that he put the squeeze on Radovan Krejcir, and Krejcir paid him R500,000. Now, he pointed me in the direction of a guy called Alikos Panay. And I interviewed Alikos Panay, a very extended interview, and took a very detailed sworn statement, which clearly implicated Lolly Jackson, George Smith, aka Louca, and Radovan Krejcir in money laundering, and I'm talking about vast sums of money. So Kevin Tradesman was also squeezing Michaelides. He knew that Michaelides had been stealing from his trust account, and he was blackmailing him. So Michaelides was paying him 100,000 rand a month. And I think what happened towards the end was Michaelides just needed to get Tradesman off his back. And what he did was he lured him to his office one day, told his staff to go out, sent them away on some mission down to the basement, and while they were out, he shot Tradesman to death. Now, immediately after he shot Tradesman, coincidentally, George Luca rocks up on the crime scene with a tray of coffee from Latilicious at the Bedford Centre and promptly, accidentally, knocked the tray of coffee over, contaminating the crime scene. Now, that was on the 4th of December. On the 5th of December, George Luca, Radovan Krejcir, and George Michaelides had lunch together at the Harbour Restaurant. So, you know, the pieces of the jigsaw puzzle are all now starting to fall into place.
Know more about your world.
eNCA.com.